More than a quarter of a century ago, our guest today published a book about the future of technology called Life After Television. Quote, "The computer of the future will be as portable as your watch and as personal as your wallet. It will recognize speech and navigate streets, collect your mail and your news." Close quote. Our guest is worth listening to today, in other words, in large measure because he got so much right back then. His new book, Life After Google. George Gilder on Uncommon Knowledge now. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. One of the nation's most important public intellectuals for more than 4 decades now, George Gilder is the author of 19 books. His 1980 bestseller, Wealth and Poverty, made a fresh argument for capitalism and became the volume that Ronald Reagan quoted more than any other. Other Gilder works, Knowledge and Power, The Scandal of Money, and Life After Television, which I mentioned just a moment ago. George Gilder's newest book, Life After Google, The Fall of Big Data and the Rise of the Blockchain Economy. George, welcome.
Great to be here, Peter, as always.
George, in Life After Google, you refer to Google, the company that all of us use for search and Gmail and mapping. You refer to Google, this marvel, as neo-Marxist. What on earth do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of people don't really understand what Marxism was. The key error of Marxism was Karl Marx's belief that the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century was a final human attainment, a kind of eschaton, that the problem of productivity and wealth creation had been solved forever.
The end of history of his day, so to speak.
Yeah, and from then on, the only challenge would be how to distribute wealth rather than how to create it. Well, Google Marxism just repeats Karl Marx's error with the new technology. Google believes that their AI, artificial intelligence, their machine learning, their robotics, their algorithmic biology, their search, and their solutions constitute a new eschaton, a new final achievement of human beings. It's even more grandiose than Karl's original vision, and that the Google people imagine a singularity where the machines will eclipse human minds and allow all of the rest of us to retire on beaches and collect a guaranteed annual income, the new fashion in Silicon Valley, while Bren and Paige fly off with Elon Musk to some remote planet in a winner-take-all universe. And I think this is delusional. Google faces impossible business problems, contradictions in their strategy, flaws in their technology, misunderstandings of the very computer science that underlie all their technology. I think Google is having a nervous breakdown.
Oh, I just want to make sure I heard this right. You just called Larry Page and Sergey Brin these geniuses who in 20 years have gone from zero to a company with a market cap of $870 billion at market close yesterday. You just called them delusional. I heard that right?
Yep. There are a lot of delusional, brilliant Marxists in the world.
All right.
Don't you encounter them all the time? I mean, you live at Stanford.
We will return to your attack on Google, but first, how did Google do it? We just agreed, the company's founded in 1998, so we go from zero, non-existence, 20 years ago, and even 2 decades ago, to a market cap of, as I said, between 800 and 900 billion, depending on the market close the day people listen to us, which makes it the second most valuable enterprise on the face of the planet. Apple just crossed $1 trillion in valuation. So the question is, how did they do it? It isn't a accomplishment of some kind.
Oh, it's an absolutely fabulous accomplishment. They dominated this era. This is the Google era. We live in it. But the next step is to upload your mind into the Google cloud. And I balk at this next step in the Google system of the world.
You spent some time in Life After Google describing the DALs, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is the huge Google data center up in Oregon. In Life After Google, you write of the diminishing returns of big data. So let me understand let me make sure I understand at least one part of your argument correctly. The delusions come next. First, there are certain almost physical constraints. We've reached the point now at which, no matter how big your data center, improvements in parsing data are only going to be incremental. It's going to be difficult to get enough power. It's going to be difficult to cool these machines adequately, which is why Google's big center is up at the Dalles, because there's a huge dam there, which means cheap hydroelectric power and cold water for cooling. So that's argument number one. They're bumping into physical limitations. Is that correct?
I think this is a symbol. The Dalles and all their data centers parked like aluminum plants beside big bodies of water or near glaciers or various other means of cooling, just like an industrial plant of the previous era. And I think that this cloud computing, which was a great triumph for its time and dominated its time, is now reaching the end of the line. A great computer scientist named Gordon Bell ordained a proposition called Bell's Law, which is that every 10 years, Moore's Law, which is the doubling of computer power every year, yields a 100 to 1,000-fold rise in total computer capability and requires a completely new computer architecture. I wrote about the cloud first. I hailed the cloud in an article in Wired in 2006 and said that it would dominate the next Bell's Law phase. But it's now 12 years since 2006, and that Bell's Law regime of cloud computing, huge data centers, all parked by bodies of water, is coming to an end.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I understand this. I want to emphasize this because I think I'm right about it. Cloud computing, I don't know who the genius was, maybe I'm talking to him now, who first conceived of the notion of the cloud, because it puts in the mind of the ordinary user the sense that somehow or other computing has now become ethereal. It's just up there. It's not up there. It's in big industrial scale operations at the Dalles in Oregon and other. So the
80 different sites around the world, I think Google has now.
Okay.
Big data centers.
So the cloud isn't the cloud, it's factories essentially of huge computers. That's correct?
Yes.
All right. You refer, again, let me quote Life After Google. Google is not just a company. It is a system of the world. That is a phrase that is important in this book. Google is a system of the world. What do you mean by that?
Well, a system of the, I think the first sort of great system of the world that unleashed the miracles of the industrial age and the British Empire and of the previous era was Isaac Newton. And he both developed the calculus and the key laws of Newtonian physics, and then proceeded to establish, as master of the mint in Britain, the gold standard. And this together, the calculus, the physics, the gold standard, were really the pillars of the industrial era and Britain's amazing global dominance from a small island. And that was a great system of the world. It was implicitly deterministic. And
Explain that term. How do you mean deterministic? Because Newton was a Christian.
Newton was a Christian and believed in free will, but his physics and his calculus implied a deterministic model.
If you did this, then this must happen.
That's right.
This action requires that reaction.
Right. A hermetically sealed system that always reproduces the same results with the same inputs, a predictable scheme. And this system of the world was essentially overthrown by Kurt Gödel.
Kurt Gödel is born in Austria. He's he comes to this country. His dates are late 19th century to the middle of the 20th century, roughly.
His great moment at age 23 or 4 was in 1930 when he addressed the great meeting at Königsberg in Austria that was going to establish mathematics as a complete system that could explain everything implicitly. If you had all the data and you had the mathematical algorithms, you could predict the entire future from the past. This was the great dream, and he permanently overthrew it with Gödel's incompleteness theory. He showed that any logical system whatsoever is necessarily dependent upon propositions that can't be proven within the logical system. And in proving this, he really invented a kind of computer software system where all the propositions and variables were expressed in numbers. So his proof that mathematics could not be coherent and completely consistent, that it depended on outside propositions, axioms, was a major breakthrough, and also established the computer age. Alan Turing then went on and took Gödel's formula and transformed it into a universal computer architecture, a Turing machine. And Turing machines are also dependent on oracles outside the machine to program them. Okay. Now Google says it has a system of the world where it's returning back to the deterministic realm. And with big data, they can predict everything. All the answers can be extracted from their aggregations of big data.
You're doing something that you do again and again in life after Google. You're operating on two levels. On one level, you're talking about technology. And Kurt Gödel, in developing these incompleteness theorems he's working on it in the 20s, and the big moment takes place in 30, is that correct?
So 1931 at
31.
Königsberg.
Okay. And he develops mathematical tools on the way to proving his point. He develops mathematical tools which form the basis of computer software language.
Yeah.
So that's the technological point that George Gilder is making. But you are also always arguing about, I won't say theology, because you're not really taking on God, but you are arguing the deep structure of reality. What is reality really like? And so there are pages here that make me scratch my head, because you're talking about technology and math, and that's hard for me. And then there are pages that make my brain explode, because you're talking about reality itself. But I want to come back to this point. Gödel proved that there can be no human construct, no human system of thought that does not rely on some reality outside itself.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
And for theological interest, Gödel desperately feared that he might have proved the existence of God.
All right.
He and Einstein used to walk together through the streets of Princeton discussing theology derived from these cerebrations.
Both nervous that they may have They may have been onto something even bigger than I see. All right. That's book number 20 for you, George. But back to book number 19. One other point about Google that you make, a shortcoming for Google, is that it gives everything away for free. And which, of course, I sent 10 emails this morning on Gmail for free. I haven't started my research for the afternoon, but I'll be using Google, and it'll be for free.
Yeah.
Okay, this is all wonderful as far as I can tell. George Gilder in Life After Google, not only is free a lie, but a price of zero signifies a return to the barter system, a morass that the human race left behind in the Stone Age. Well, now I am confounded. How can this marvel of technology be dragging us back to the Stone Age?
Well, because of free, there are two key points about free. First of all, it avoids the price system. So it avoids liabilities to customers that you actually have to serve because the customers have paid you. It avoids the requirement of security, because who wants to steal something that's free? It doesn't completely avoid the obligations of security, but it essentially greatly relieves the problems of constantly conducting secure transactions with customers to whom you owe something. And it also prohibits learning, because the key to capitalism is learning curves. As I told you in my last meeting here, wealth is knowledge. And if wealth is knowledge, economic growth is learning. And one of the key instruments of learning in a capitalist system is the signal of prices. And by giving away all its products for free, Google avoids this precarious process of falsifiable learning that is the heart of capitalist growth. So by giving away products for free, they avoid the security challenge to a great extent. They avoid direct liabilities and responsibilities to real customers. And they avoid the learning process that allows capitalist growth.
When you say they avoid the security problem you have in mind is what we all now feel every time we go on the web. We're afraid of identity theft. We're afraid of being hacked. We get alerts from Google itself saying, Were you this user? Was that you who checked in and changed your password? The feeling that we're naked before, who knows, unknown, faceless enemy. That's the security problem they're avoiding, because if they give things away for free, security patches are good enough. That's the point?
But the fact is, security is not a video game. Security is an architecture. And the existing computer architecture, of which Google is the paramount exponent, is failing. Okay. It's filling the internet with clutter. It's failing with the smartphone. 30% of your payments for smartphone services go to download ads that you don't want to see. You really don't want these ads on your smartphones. They are not ads, they are minuses. And only 0.06% of these smartphone ads are clicked on. And according to surveys, 50% of these clicks approximately are in error. So only 0.03% of smartphone ads are actually desired. And this is a catastrophe. This is not a viable business, and Google is coming to the end of the line in smartphone advertising. It's trying to move from search, where it serves the rest of the internet to solutions where Google is the answer man in the sky, and its AI, with its increasing accumulation of big data, can answer all your questions. But that's where I make the charge of delusional.
All right, the new system of the world. Again, life after Google. This very lack of concern with security will be Google's undoing. For every other player on the net, the lack of security is the most relevant threat to its current business model. This problem will be solved. So fundamental will security be to the new system that its very name will be derived from it. It will be the cryptocosm. Explain that term.
The cryptocosm refers to this amazing providential efflorescence of creativity that's erupted all around the world to supply a new architecture for the internet, and indeed, ultimately, a new architecture for the entire world economy. At a very time that the system of central banks, with its $5.1 trillion a day of currency trading that doesn't even arrive at settled currency values or significant currency values, and the architecture of the internet, which requires you to expose yourself stripped naked virtually before the cameras in order to conduct a transaction. You have your passwords, pins, your usernames, your last four numbers of your social security, your mother's maiden name, your first school, your favorite pet, your irises, your DNA, this method of authenticating people to participate in internet transactions is bankrupt. They may imagine that this is a viable system, but it isn't. It is failing every day, and it's going to be replaced by the cryptocosm, by the blockchain, by a whole series of technologies deriving from the blockchain.
Right. So I want to use security is, I'm quoting again, security is not a procedure or a mechanism, it is an architecture. The cryptocosm will start by defining the ground state. You don't build the building, you build the foundation. The ground state. It is the ultimate non-random reality. The ground state is you. Yeah. The ground state is you. Explain that.
Well, the ground state in the cryptocosm is your private key, which validates you as your DNA identifies you. It's
so this is not. This isn't. You're not overreaching for the sake of argument. You are saying that in the cryptocosm, blockchain technology will permit us all to have some kind of
unimpeachable ID,
which is as individual to us and as undecryptable as our DNA.
Correct.
Okay. Wow. All right. And you'd better explain. And here I brace. Here I'm just going to hold the table with both hands. You'd better explain for the layman. I'll give you a short paragraph. Blockchain. What is blockchain? Make me understand that.
Blockchain is a new architecture, new security architecture for the internet that allows you to keep your information to yourself, and it distributes all the personal information all across the network, just as human intelligence is distributed across the world in individual human brains. It's not agglomerated in giant data clumps. It's human intelligence is distributed. The blockchain distributes personal data rather than concentrating it in one of the few big walled gardens, Google,
like
Facebook, concentrating it, and then forcing you to petition to the big centralized database for the right to be yourself on the internet. It's a distributed way of you keep your data to yourself and use whatever data you need to conduct a particular transaction. But it originated as a form of money, Bitcoin.
Right.
But it's often compared to cash because it seems to allow anonymity.
Yes.
But it's really better than cash. It's a major step forward beyond cash because not only does it allow you to conduct anonymous transactions, it also enables you to demonstrate your behavior and your transactions unimpeachably, if you have to the IRS, to a prosecutor, to Preet Bharara, or whoever it may be. The blockchain gives you an immutable record that allows you to document your behavior. And it's always seemed to me that the key thing isn't really privacy, isn't really as critical as being able to prove that you didn't do something that a government wants to charge you with doing. You know, that the ability of attestation is an important advance that the blockchain offers, both in third world countries and in the United States.
All right. So your limited claim in Life After Google is that we have a new technology coming along that will make use of my smartphone and my desktop and your smartphone and your desktop and distribute transactions and intelligence and in some ways meaning across everybody's smartphones and computers, and it will render Google's fantastically huge investment in these 80 different data centers. It will render those beside the point, perhaps.
Yeah, well, we're very like those big abandoned aluminum plants that you can see up the Dalles.
Okay. That's the limited claim. Here's the larger claim, that blockchain can fix a lot of what's wrong with America. Life After Google. Blockchain technology will address the doldrums of centralization, insecurity, and sclerosis afflicting the current information economy. Okay, now how's that? How's that? IPOs are down. This is the Peter Thiel argument that we're just not getting the innovation that it feels as though we should have, right?
Yeah.
And how does blockchain jumpstart the whole economy?
Well, it's because blockchain corresponds with the reality of the world, which is the ultimate thinking element is the human mind, individual human minds, each one different, each one with a potential of its own, which can make its own contribution. And blockchain is an answer to this cloud mind, which I call sky computing, which you described so well with the computers and smartphones all around the world, contributing their cycles as needed to perform supercomputer computations as required, or 3D rendering from the internet, that is having 3D experiences provided across the internet, all from the skies, open skies, rather than from the clouds of Google, Facebook, and the rest of the giants, Apple and Amazon, and which are the biggest companies in the world, and a tremendous upset. I'm not for any kind of attacks on them. I'm of government regulation or whatever. I don't think that that's the problem at all. I think the problem is that they have a business plan and a technological solution that's inappropriate to a world full of individual human minds.
Okay, so here's your argument then. Your argument is the ultimate resource, the base of it all, is not any human construct, still less anything that has such a centralizing tendency as these huge data centers that we began by discussing. Yeah. Your argument is no. It's the individual. The individual is the resource,
Yeah.
and blockchain will empower individual
That's
human
right.
beings. Individual human beings in conditions of economic and political liberty are resources, and blockchain will empower them.
That's right.
I've
That's
got- okay.
well put. That's the
Well,
conclusion.
I've been
of the
reading
book.
you for 35 years, George.
It is already happening. I mean, you mentioned the IPO crisis. You know, the 90% drop in the number of IPOs, the 50% shrinkage of the number of more than 50%, 60% shrinkage of the number of public companies on the stock market. We're having a stock market boom while the number of companies shrinks drastically, and new challengers don't rise up. IPOs, a Thiel fellow, you mentioned Peter Thiel,
Yes.
who's a pivotal figure in life after Google. Peter Thiel has created these Thiel
Thiel fellowships, that's
and
right.
one of the first ones was Vitalik Buterin, who established Ethereum just 5 or 6 years ago, which is a new blockchain based on Satoshi's Bitcoin blockchain, but improved and more generalized. And he created the new blockchain, a new global computer platform, a new programming language called Solidity, a new currency to finance a new form of smart contracts which could be implemented on this new computer platform, a new source of measurement for the value of the money and the energy consumption of the computer cycles required to implement the smart contracts, a huge new compound enterprise that in the last 12 months has essentially solved the IPO problem with ICOs. That's
Initial coin offerings?
Initial coin offerings, initial Cayman offerings, initial crypto offerings, and they've raised $20 billion in less than 12 months for thousands of new companies. Many of them have failed. Many have gone
That's
bust,
the way it
just
goes.
like the internet
Right.
upsurge. But this is
they
an
found a way to get
amazing
capital.
efflorescence that this Vitalik Buterin, who I think is one of the great entrepreneurs of our history, has accomplished in 12 months. Pretty much solved the IPO problem. It's the Chinese are rebelling because cryptocurrencies are global, and the Chinese are skittish about anything that allows the globalization of Chinese capital that's not completely controlled. But anyway, China is deeply involved in all these new cryptocosmic developments.
George, a special topic. You touch on it, you discussed it at some length in Life After Google. It's not the central point, but it's a special topic. Artificial intelligence. In Life After Google, you describe a 2017 conference of technologists at Asilomar, California. Quote, they gathered at Asilomar to alert the world to the dire threat posed by themselves, by Silicon Valley. Their computer technology, artificial intelligence, had gained such power and momentum that they now deemed it nothing less than a menace to mankind. To the Googleplex intellectuals, mathematics is essentially a doomsday machine, close quote. And they're wrong?
Yeah, they forgot Gödel. They just don't understand their own technology. It's sad, but they don't.
Okay, hold on.
They imagine that.
Hold on. You're talking about Elon Musk and his buddies Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the Googleplex intellectuals.
Musk essentially funded that Asilomar conference.
However, now I see you and I raise you, George. I'm going to listen to this intellectual, Henry Kissinger, writing in the Atlantic magazine this past spring, quote, heretofore, the technological advance that most altered the course of modern history was the invention of the printing press in the 15th century. But now, The world is experiencing an even more sweeping technological revolution whose culmination may be a world relying on machines ungoverned by ethical or philosophical norms, close quote. Now you're taking on Henry Kissinger. Go ahead.
He was my tutor.
At Harvard in the old days?
Yeah, he was assigned to be my tutor. I was something of a rebellious student, and I never quite...
Even then?
But I loved Henry. He is a great man. And he has absorbed the Google system of the world, and he is wrong.
Why?
Artificial intelligence is a terrific extension of human intelligence. It requires an oracle just like any other machine extension.
It's still a tool.
It still
requires being held in a human hand in a certain sense.
Yes, and it in no way usurps the human brain. That whole concept that somehow a machine can usurp the human mind and excel the human mind.
Well,
it's true only if you say that the abacus or the calculator excels the human mind. Of course they do in certain functions, but when Garry Kasparov competes with Big Blue, Gary's using 12 to 14 watts of energy, and is not connected to anything beyond his own mind, while Big Blue is using essentially gigawatts of energy connected to those big cloud data centers, and it just isn't. And moreover, they're addressing a deterministic problem. And a deterministic problem can be solved by a machine. But deterministic problems are interesting, but irrelevant to information, as Claude Shannon showed. Information is defined as surprise. It's unexpected bits. It's entropy, as he called it. And surprise is the essence of human creativity. Surprises in a machine is a breakdown. It's bad news when your machine starts surprising you. And the way the Google people simulate creativity in machines is they introduce randomness to the machines. And they pretend that is somehow simulating creativity. But randomness is minus information. They're subtracting information rather than adding it. It's just like their ads are actually minuses. Their creative inputs into their machines are actually minuses as well.
All right. So here's what we all have in the backs of our minds. 2001 Space Odyssey, in which Hal, he takes over the spaceship.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
It's a funny scene, but it's of course chilling. And in those days, it was fiction, which is why it was funny.
Yeah.
But that's what everybody has in his mind, that the machines will take over. They'll start giving us orders. You said you were taught by Henry Kissinger, or you were supposed to have been taught by him. Another person you know well is Ray Kurzweil.
I do.
Who is at Google now. And Ray Kurzweil wrote a book in 2005 entitled The Singularity is Near. And he argues that machines would become so intelligent that the distinction between computers and humans would disappear. Yeah. Hal would take over. And you say the machines will never be that smart, or you say it is in principle impossible. It doesn't matter how smart they are.
Yeah, it's in principle impossible. That machines do not essentially think. They don't know anything. There are systems of gates, of dumb components. They lack this creativity, which is epitomized in all the unexpected bits, the surprising results that human minds and imaginations can generate.
All right.
Computers are deterministic, they're machines. And Ray wrote a book called How to Create a Mind. It's a brilliant exposition of how to make a good speech recognizer. And in that book, he pretty much concludes that consciousness isn't really an issue. Consciousness is an emergent effect. It's an epiphenomenon of these machine processes that computer scientists understand. But this is just nonsense. If you don't understand consciousness, you don't understand thinking. Thinking doesn't produce consciousness. Consciousness produces thinking. And all these computer scientists are trying to explain away consciousness. But that's where we are. That's where we live. That's how we think. That's the issue. Right. And to say, oh, well, we don't know what consciousness is, but our machines are going to compute so fast that it won't matter, that consciousness will emerge like one of their clouds, I think is just another fundamental vanity of the valley.
Got it. Last questions, George. In your earlier book, Life After Television, published again in 1990, you predicted computers as small as watches, speech recognition, mapping, navigation systems. You got a lot right. But you also predicted, this was in some ways the fundamental argument of the book, that as we went from broadcast television to the 500 channels of cable, and now, of course, we have the essentially infinite channels of Netflix and YouTube and all the rest, this direct streaming, as we did that, programming would no longer need to cater to the lowest common denominator. So we would no longer all be watching Claptrap like the Beverly Hillbillies. You'd go online and you'd be able to pursue your interest in opera. Someone else would be studying calculus. Somebody else would be learning a language. We would be enlightened. We would be ennobled.
Well, that's true.
Well, some of that has happened.
Yeah.
But you didn't tell us that porn was going to be absolutely pervasive. You didn't tell us that kids...
I think I did tell you that porn would be
in
pervasive.
Life After Television?
I think I mentioned that porn is pretty hard to escape. But anyway.
Okay, so but
I was wrong. I was
what I'm
wrong.
trying to say is it was a wonderfully optimistic. I still remember I went through it in one reading. I started it at lunchtime, and I neglected my work for the rest of the day because, in any event, it was a wonderful book. But it didn't work out as happily as one would have expected from reading that book. Father of children, you're a father of children. You have a grandchild. The kids have these phones in their hands so long that attention spans suffer, family conversations. Here's Henry Kissinger again. Inundated via social media with the opinions of multitudes, users are diverted from introspection. These pressures weaken the fortitude required to develop and sustain convictions that can be implemented only by traveling a lonely road, which is the essence of creativity, close quote. What do you do with this argument that it didn't work out?
Yeah.
Technology has not ennobled us. It's made us passive and uncreative and lonely.
Well, I think we were passive, uncreative, and lonely before. I think there's a certain illusion of a golden age that somehow we had privacy, we had creativity, we attained virtue in a different way than we do today. I'm sort of skeptical of the golden age idea, but I'm also skeptical of the idea that this technology is the eschaton, that it's the final thing, that this
the blockchain. What you're talking about?
AI.
AI
and all these Google era stuff that produced the effects that you're describing. And I agree with the effects you're describing, essentially. But I do believe that the blockchain and related cryptographic technologies, it's part of a creative insurgency, are an almost perfect answer to the problems that currently afflict the net.
Let me
That
try one more.
They provide this distribution of intelligence and distribution of private rights and points of view that has been lost to some extent in the cloud.
Let me try one more line of attack on an old friend who knows 1,000 times more about all this than I do, but it's a layman's attack.
Okay.
And it's this. In Life After Television, published in 1990, and again, I can just remember what an event it was to read that book. It was wonderfully optimistic. This is going to make things better. Well, actually, we have all the kludge that you were talking about, the ads we don't want, all that we just discussed. And now you write Life After Google. This is it. Blockchain is going to solve all the problems. And so, what about original sin? What about we're stuck with this? Or what about, I'm thinking now, you brush against theology, and I know it interests you. What about 20th century theologian Jacques Maritain, who argued that as sin and redemption work themselves out in history, things are getting better, but also worse at the same time. And that is the human condition. So even blockchain is another tool. It will be morally neutral. It'll have wonderful benefits, but it may have significant costs. I'm trying to get George Gilder to accept some piece of the tragic view of life.
Well, I loved Unamuno's The Tragic View of Life. Ortega y Gasset was one of my favorite philosophers.
All right.
And so I accept the tragic view of life. But we're all going to die. We're all...
Blockchain won't solve that one.
Blockchain won't solve that one. Blockchain won't solve many of the intrinsic torments of life and sin on this earth. I readily acknowledge that. Blockchain is part of the public world where the great human adventures are conducted, the great new companies are launched, the continued dynamism of human creativity is expressed. And what I'm arguing against is what Bill Buckley used to call immanentizing the eschaton, imagining that some technology that you've come up with last week is the final technology that will end the human adventure, that will subsume all our minds in the clouds, governed by 8 giant companies in China and the U.S., and with some few nerds in Israel contributing all the new ideas. This is the vision that I don't think is going to prevail. I think the human adventure will continue after Google.
George Gilder, author of Life After Google, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge and the Hoover Institution. Thanks for joining us.